Donald Trump makes his first trip abroad since becoming president with a visit to Saudi Arabia. He's given a warm welcome by King Salman before signing lucrative trade deals between the two nations.
Hundreds of billions of dollars of investments into the United States and jobs, jobs, jobs.
His success in Saudi Arabia contrasts with his political problems in Washington. Also tonight, Trident, Jeremy Corbyn restates Labour's commitment after a senior colleague suggested support for it couldn't be guaranteed. A joyous reunion. Dozens of schoolgirls kidnapped in Nigeria by Islamist militants 3 years ago finally see their families. And another Middleton gets married, with the family's youngest members sharing centre stage. Good evening. Donald Trump has been welcomed in Saudi Arabia as he began his first trip abroad since becoming president. He signed deals worth £270 billion, a third of which is defence-related. Riyadh is his first stop on a 9-day journey around the Middle East and Europe. It's a trip his aides hope will divert attention from his political problems back in Washington. Our North America editor John Sopel is travelling with the president and sent this report.
With the mercury touching 100 degrees Fahrenheit, Donald Trump probably found the blast of desert air refreshing compared to the political hothouse that he's left behind in Washington. He's hoping that this first foreign trip will provide some respite from the mounting problems at home. And what a welcome his hosts laid on for him. The 81-year-old king came to greet him, red carpet for as far as the eye could see. He was even given Saudi Arabia's highest civilian honour, a weighty thing. A marked contrast to the almost hostile reception afforded Barack Obama when he was last here.
Wherever you go in Riyadh, this is what you're going to see. Pictures of President Trump and King Salman with the slogan, "Together we prevail." A year ago, Donald Trump said in an interview, "I think Islam hates us." From the reception he's receiving and the warmth of it, you wouldn't guess it.
The new president's tough stance on Iran has endeared him to the Saudis and other Sunni nations in the region. And as part of that, a massive £75 billion arms deal was signed to supply the kingdom with weapons and know-how to meet the Iranian threat. And this allowed the president to talk about what he likes most, jobs.
It was a tremendous day. I just want to thank everybody, but tremendous investments into the United States and our military. Community is very happy, and we want to thank you and Saudi Arabia. But hundreds of billions of dollars of investments into the United States and jobs, jobs, jobs.
At a news conference, the deal was welcomed by the Secretary of State.
This huge arms sales package reduces the burden on the United States to provide this same equipment to our own military forces, and will strengthen Saudi security forces for the future so that Saudi Arabia is more capable of carrying a greater share of the burden.
Less welcome news came overnight from James Comey. The sacked FBI director has accepted an invitation to give evidence to Congress in a public session, although that won't happen before this trip has concluded. According to the New York Times, the president described him to the Russian foreign minister as a nut job whose sacking had relieved a lot of the pressure on the president, claims the White House has not denied. Donald Trump complained earlier this week that no politician had been treated worse or more unfairly than him. That is not something that could be said today. Though the composer of the national anthem probably could. John Sopel, BBC News, Riyadh.
Jeremy Corbyn has restated Labour's commitment to renewing Trident after his shadow Foreign Secretary suggested the party's support for the nuclear deterrent couldn't be guaranteed. Mr Corbyn insisted that Labour's manifesto commitment to Trident was unequivocal. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
On the campaign trail, the last thing he wanted was fresh questions about the UK's nuclear deterrent, but today he had to clarify his party's stance. It came after a senior Labour figure When asked if the party would commit to keeping the Trident missile system even after a defence review, said this.
No, of course not. I mean, if you're going to have a review, you have to have a review.
Yeah.
The policy is, the Labour Party policy is that we...
I know what it is,
yeah,
but I'm asking, could it in the future change?
But overwhelmingly, we need to make sure that our policy is up to date and meets 21st century threats. And no one can disagree with that, surely.
Jeremy Corbyn's long opposed nuclear weapons, but his party's policy is to support the renewal of Trident, something he had to confirm again today.
The manifesto makes it very clear that the Labour Party has come to a decision, is committed to Trident. We're also going to look at the real security needs of this country on other areas such as cyber security.
The SNP was quick to strike. Trident's based in Scotland, so matters to voters here, and her party opposes it.
The confusion and chaos at the heart of the Labour Party on Trident really does illustrate the point that Labour is not strong enough to stand up to the Tories.
But Theresa May thinks her stance on security and defence will cut through with voters, and, out campaigning today, wasted no time in saying so.
We have seen yet again from Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party today that a Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn would not be unequivocally committed to the Trident nuclear deterrent. They would not be able to defend this country.
Theresa May has made so much of this campaign about leadership qualities. She wants to keep it that way. But now the parties have published their manifestos, there's also plenty of policy to pick over. And not everyone agrees with some Tory proposals. These are Labour protesters, but there are rumblings within the Conservative Party about changes to social care. Elections can lay bare divisions across the board.
And Alex is with me now. And Alex, the Conservatives have got their own problems with social care, haven't they?
Yeah, well, the party's manifesto included a proposal to change the way it's funded. So currently, if you have assets of more than £23,000, you might have to pay towards the cost of your care. Now, that figure's going to go up to £100,000. But crucially, for those who need care at home, the value of their house could be taken into account. Labour and the Liberal Democrats have been highly critical of these plans, saying it's pensioners, it's older people and long-term ill people who could be affected by this. And there seems also some concern from within the Conservative Party. Some activists and members saying they want more detail, others worried that there's no cap on what people could end up paying. Now, Theresa May has said this is about making the system fairer between the generations and also making sure that social care funding is sustainable in the long term. But it seems there are some in the Conservative Party worried about the impact that this might have, not least on traditional Tory voters.
OK. Alex, many thanks. The Liberal Democrats have unveiled their latest election poster. It's a picture of Nigel Farage's face superimposed onto the head and shoulders of Theresa May. Former Business Secretary and Lib Dem candidate Sir Vince Cable said it represented how Conservatives had adopted wholesale policies from UKIP. Dozens of the schoolgirls who were kidnapped from the Nigerian town of Chibok 3 years ago have been reunited with their families. The girls were released earlier this month as part of a deal between the Nigerian government and the Boko Haram Islamist militants who've been holding them. Our correspondent Alistair Leithhead reports now on the emotional reunions in the Nigerian capital, Abuja.
The moment they'd been waiting more than 3 years for, to see each other again. An emotional reunion for the newly returned Chibok girls and their parents. 82 of the missing girls were released 2 weeks ago. It was a celebratory first meeting, but this is the start of a long process.
I cannot overemphasize how I feel. I'm just laughing, clapping my hand, all the family, because of happiness and joy.
Assimilating them back into society after so long being held hostage in the forest by Boko Haram militants. Both the girls and their parents have gone through a lot of change since the kidnapping. And they won't be heading back home to Chibok anytime soon. They're under the care of the Women's Affairs Ministry and the security services, keen to talk to them about their experiences. The BBC has been with the families in remote Chibok all this week. It's taken a while to make 100% sure of the girls' identities. This was the moment parents were asked to confirm from a photo that their girls were among those released.
Now every parent have identified his and her daughter.
The 82 Chibok girls were only released after months of complicated negotiations. 5 Boko Haram commanders were exchanged for them. And the BBC's been told that €2 million may also have been part of the deal, but that can't yet be confirmed. The government says it's doing all it can, and talks are going on to try and release the 113 still being held. Their medical checks are continuing, and the girls will be given psychological therapy before starting their education again, amid tight security. We weren't allowed to ask them any questions. The intense media focus on the Chibok girls has at least helped many to be freed, and they are just some of the thousands of other women and girls also abducted by Boko Haram. Alistair Leather, BBC News, Nigeria.
Iran's newly re-elected President Hassan Rouhani has said he will continue in his second term in office to reach out to the world and to work towards a freer society. He took 57% of the vote, thereby securing an outright victory and avoiding a runoff with his main rival. In a triumphant message on Twitter, Mr. Rouhani said the Iranian people were the real winners. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams has the details.
In the end, it wasn't even close. The pragmatic Hassan Rouhani winning comfortably. For reform-minded, middle-class voters, this was a significant victory. They came out in huge numbers, determined not to let hardliners take back the presidency. Iranians know their president is not a natural reformer, but they're weary of conflict and, in the cities at least, eager for change. Mr. Rouhani seemed to represent their best hope. Today he thanked them and addressed the international community.
Today the world is well aware that the Iranian nation has chosen the path of interaction with the world, a path which is distant from extremism and violence. Our nation seeks to live in peace and friendship with the world, but is not ready to accept any disrespect or threat.
His biggest achievement to date, a nuclear deal signed with world powers 2 years ago. Today, one of those involved in the diplomacy said she welcomed the president's win.
I know how committed it is to continue the full implementation of the agreement, but also how committed he is to engaging with the international community.
But Iran's regional ambitions in the Middle East still complicate this difficult relationship. Iran remains a big supporter of Syria's President Assad. In neighbouring Lebanon, Iran supplies and sponsors the Hezbollah militia. In Yemen, it supports Houthi rebels, and its influence over the government in Iraq remains enormous. The Trump administration says Iran's missile program is another threat. New sanctions are being imposed. Speaking in Saudi Arabia, America's top diplomat delivered a warning.
What I would hope is that Rouhani now has a new term, and that he used that term to begin a process of dismantling Iran's network of terrorism, dismantling the manning and the logistics and everything that they provide to these destabilizing forces that exist in this region.
Whatever Mr. Rouhani wants, everyone knows it's this man, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, who calls the shots. There's only so much his president can do. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Sport now, and it's been a busy day in rugby union. In the Premiership semi-finals, Saracens' hopes of consecutive domestic and European titles were ended by Exeter, and Wasps pulled off a last-minute win over Leicester Tigers. Ade Doyin watched the action.
Saracens, a team on a mission. The target, a second successive European and domestic double. The first part was achieved last week. Standing between them and a place in the Premiership final, Exeter Chiefs. There was little to separate the two sides in the first half. 6-all, with all the points coming from the boot. But straight after the break, Exeter hit their stride. Jack Noel scrambling over the line. A crucial lead against a team that beat them in last year's final. Exeter had the momentum and the support of the home crowd, but joy soon turned to despair. In the last 5 minutes, an acrobatic finish from Mike Ellery had Saracens pulled off a great escape. But there was to be one final twist in the dying moments. Sam Simmons hustled and bustled his way over the line Exeter winning in the most dramatic fashion to deny Saracens another double. The second semi-final was equally dramatic. Wasps were hoping to make their first Premiership final in 9 years, and it all started well enough. A well-worked move with Kurtley Beale running in the first try. But Leicester fought back and took the lead early in the second half, and they hung on until the final moments and looked set to cause what would have been a huge upset. Until this. Josh Bassett sending Wasps to the final for the first time since 2008, and a date against the Exeter Chiefs. Adi Adedoyin, BBC News.
Hundreds of guests and spectators gathered in Englefield in Berkshire for the wedding of Pippa Middleton, sister of the Duchess of Cambridge. Her nephew and niece, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, had starring roles in the ceremony, as our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
A society wedding, a chance to, well, to gawp at the guests, for one thing. Interesting for some, others may feel perhaps a little indifferent to it all. But of course this was rather more than a society wedding with celebrity guests like tennis champion Roger Federer, because this was a Middleton family wedding, so a wedding with royal connections. Big sister Catherine arrived with 2 carloads of bridesmaids and page boys. Among them were Prince George, his hand firmly being held by his mother, and Princess Charlotte. They were ushered into church, ready for the arrival of the bride. Pippa Middleton was driven to church in an open-topped car with her father Michael. It rekindled memories of how it was 6 years ago, when Pippa played such a memorable supporting role at Catherine's wedding at Westminster Abbey. Today she was the one pausing at the entrance for the photographers, in a dress which fashion editors will spend pages describing. At the church door the roles were reversed. It was Kate lending the sisterly support, making sure the dress was as it should be. Then, with a final pat on the shoulder, it was time for the service to begin. Less than an hour later, the church bells sounded and page boy George led the way out of church, scattering flower petals, as the new Mr. and Mrs. James Matthews emerged together as man and wife. Somewhere in the family group were Princes William and Harry. Despite speculation in the press, Harry had not brought his girlfriend Meghan Markle to the wedding. Had he done so, it would have overshadowed everything. And this was a day when the focus was on this couple and their wedding. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, Englefield.
And you can see more on all of today's stories on the BBC News channel. That's all from me. Good night.
Good evening. The minority escaped the rain today, but tomorrow the majority of us will stay dry. We've had some really intense downpours. This was